Part of the purpose of Earthwatch is not only to find volunteers to assist researchers, but also to educate people while they're on their expeditions. And a really great way that Earthwatch does this is by having its volunteers visit different cultural places around the area that they're working in. On our expedition in India, we had a chance to visit a lot of different cultural places, and that was definitely my favorite part about the whole expedition, was just the fact that we're doing some good in the area, but that we also had a chance to connect with the area and learn a lot about it. So for part 2 of the Earthwatch in India episode, I wanted to talk to you about the cultural experiences that we had while we were there. After taking the plane, the first thing that we did when we landed in Kulu was to drive through the town, and we were really lucky because it just so happened that a major festival was happening on the day that we landed. This festival is called Kuludashira, and I actually had no idea that we would even be seeing a festival while we were on our expedition, so this was just an added bonus to the trip, but it actually ended up being one of the most memorable parts of the whole thing, and one of my most memorable travel experiences altogether. The thing that made this festival so memorable was just the fact that, first of all, there were so many people. I've never been in such a large crowd before. It was so crowded that at sometimes when I was walking through, I couldn't actually choose the way that I would be walking. Normally in a situation like that, it would be really overwhelming, but everyone was having a good time. They were playing music with traditional instruments, there were drums, and there were these incredible palanquins that were being carried on the shoulders of festival participants. Kulu, as I mentioned in part 1, is an old town in Himachal Pradesh, which is in the northern part of India, and that's the place where our expedition was taking place. But because it's such an old town, there's a lot of history and even mythology around it. You may be familiar with the story of the Great Flood. The story of the Great Flood has a lot of different versions depending on the religion or the region where it's being told. But in this part of India, the story of the Great Flood actually says that there was the first man, his name was Manu, and he stepped down onto the earth from his celestial boat, and when he put his foot down, he stepped into the Kulu Valley. We'll get back into that part a little bit later in the episode, but first let's just talk about this festival that goes on every year in Kulu. The festival itself is actually a week long, and we were there for part of it, and it begins with the procession of Lord Raghunath and some other deities being carried on what's called a ratha through town. So each of the village gods and other minor deities are also a part of this celebration, and on the 6th day of the celebration, all of those village devtas, they get together in one place and they have a big celebration together. We weren't there for that part, but we were there for the cultural processions that were happening, and we got to see a lot of the palanquins being carried either from high up in the mountains or from other areas, and I've even included some videos of the festival, and you'll see in one of the videos we could see one of these palanquins being carried right past our guest house. So they walk a really long distance with this heavy palanquin, possibly over the course of a few days, all the way down the mountain to where this festival is taking place. The festival itself actually has a lot of legend and myth around it, but there are two main stories. The first one says that Maharishi Jamdagni, when he was returning from Kailash, he was carrying a basket of images of 18 different gods. And while crossing a pass, there was a huge storm, and it scattered the images of all of these gods around the Kulu Valley. And when the people living in the hills saw these images, they were taking the forms of gods. And so this is why that beautiful place became known as the Valley of the Gods. But there's also the second legend about how this festival came to be. This one dates all the way back to the 16th century. The origins of this festival, it goes back to the time of Raja Jagat Singh, and he was the ruler of Kulu at that time. And what happened was he heard that a peasant had a bowl full of pearls of knowledge, and he ordered that that peasant give him those pearls or he would face death. But the peasant knew that there was a wickedness and a greed about this Raja, and so instead of giving him the pearls, he set his house on fire and he himself burned to death along with his whole family. He also cursed the Raja when he died, and this curse, it took over the Raja, and instead of seeing rice in his bowl, he saw worms, and instead of water, he saw blood. So he was panicking and he started to get sick, and he just couldn't overcome this curse. Finally, he went to a holy man to get some help, and the holy man told him that only the blessings of Lord Brahma would be able to cure him. The king had to abdicate his crown and put an idol of Lord Ragnaroth on the empty throne, promising that only the Lord and his successors would rule the kingdom of Kulu thereon. And since this time, it is believed that Lord Ragnaroth has invited other gods from the heavens to celebrate Dashera in Kulu. That idol is the center of the whole festival. So that's the story behind the festival, and it was just such an incredible sight to see. Like I said, I had never been in a crowd so large before, and normally it would be quite scary to be in a situation like that, not being able to control which direction you were walking in, but I was just kind of going with the flow, and in fact I ended up getting separated from the rest of the Earthwatch team, but we had a specific meeting place we were supposed to get back to, and so wasn't really worried about it. I was just going through the festival, and if you happen to just be listening to this episode rather than watching it on YouTube, this is one of those episodes where I really suggest that you head over to YouTube or head over to Instagram and check out the photos. You can see lots of photos of the festival, the musicians, the people that were there, the beautifully decorated palanquins carrying the deities. It was something that I never expected to see, and I'm so glad that I did. There were lots of different, really delicious looking foods being served, and in the center of the festival, there were all these different things going on, a big crowd watching, and just being a watcher of the crowd, so kind of being a spectator of the spectators, was really interesting because, like I said, I hadn't known about this festival at all, so I really didn't have any idea what it was about, and I had to look into it later to really understand what was going on. But just seeing that without any context was something also really incredible, because you try to guess, well, what's going on here, and as the people are carrying the palanquins through the crowds, they're kind of making it look like almost as if they're battling together, but everyone's having a really happy time. Everyone's got a smile on their face, and the whole mood, everyone was really friendly. I was asking a lot of people if I could take their photos, and everyone had a big smile and said yes, and so it was just something very memorable and really a perfect introduction to this area. I had had a really good experience in the other parts of India. This was at the end of my trip, so I had been having a really good time in the other parts, but just being up here, and it was a little bit cooler temperature-wise, and even though I was still in India, it just felt like another world within that other world that I had already entered. So back to that myth of the Great Flood that I was telling you about, and how I told you that the Kulu Valley was the place where Manu first stepped onto Earth after he left his celestial boat. Because this is a place that's considered to be the center, there are naturally a lot of very old temples and things that have been constructed. We were lucky enough to see 2 of those temples, and the first one I'm going to talk about is Muralider Temple. It's a Krishna temple, which means that it's a temple mainly dedicated to the god Krishna. And it's about 27 kilometers from the center of Kulu. The temple itself is believed to be about 1,000 years old, and while there was a devastating earthquake that happened in 1905 that caused the temple to be in need of some repairs, it's just the upper portion. So you can see that base, that original temple architecture is still there, and it's in the late Gupta style, so you'll see a lot of really intricate carvings and a lot of different really beautiful imagery. And of course, I won't be able to explain what all of the imagery is, but it was just so intricately carved, some animals and other deities, and the beauty of it is really incredible. We walked to the temple from our guest house. It was higher up than our guest house was, so we were actually headed up the mountain a little bit. On the way there, the walk was so relaxing. It was, of course, through the forest, and a good time to reflect on things, think about the research, just take in the scenery. And again, this wasn't something that I really knew much about. I have always been interested in ancient architecture. I myself am not a religious person, but religious art, and especially very ancient religious art, is something that has always really fascinated me. I studied a lot about it in university as part of my major, and so seeing something like this that came from 1,000 years ago was really a privilege. To be standing in front of something that's just so old, and to think about what people were doing and what they were thinking as they were creating something that was as beautiful as that is a really nice way to connect to the past. As a non-Hindu, we weren't actually allowed inside the temple, but we were free to go around the courtyard, and the people that were there, they were very friendly. They were telling us a little bit about the temple, and it was a really calm morning that day, so they had a lot of time to tell us a few stories and just to share their friendliness. So this was yet another very memorable part of the Earthwatch expedition. We also had time to stop by a Tibetan village, and because of how complicated it could be for the identities of people that are living in that village, I haven't included any pictures of the people living there, but I do have some images of the village itself and even a little dog from the village. And this village was really striking because there were the Tibetan prayer flags hanging everywhere, and everyone in the village was very welcoming to us. They were happy to have some visitors, and it's of course another opportunity to raise awareness of their cause and of their struggle. And so if this is something that you want to know more about, I will leave some links in the show notes so that you can get involved with that. Along with the Tibetan village, we also had a chance to visit a monastery. And that monastery, it's like a school, but it's nonprofit, and it is designed to care and educate less advantaged children, particularly in the Himalayan region. Again, I do have some photos of the school itself. I don't have any pictures of the students, just out of their privacy. They're minors. But if you'd like to see the school, it's in the Tibetan style. It's very colorful. Construction didn't actually begin until December of 2001, so it's not such an old school, but because it's not so old, the colors are very, very vibrant. Such a rainbow of colors everywhere you looked. It was very pleasing to look at and very nice to walk around. We also visited the Galway Shankar Temple, and that's also on the way to Nagar. It's in the Nagar village. And this temple dates back to the 12th century. It's dedicated to the Lord Shiva. The temple is protected, and it's a little bit different than a pagoda, but it's this dome-shaped temple that has 9 stories, and it's very ornately decorated with motifs and stone carvings. You can see the idols Gauri and Shankar, which are up on a pedestal, and there is also a beautiful image of Lord Ganesh. There are people playing instruments and beautiful dancing girls carved right into the stone. Again, we walked there. We took a little hike to get there, and just this gorgeous temple surrounded by the green and overlooking the Bees River. It's the perfect way to enjoy the calm, to connect with nature, and also to connect so far back into history. Just right in front of your face, it really makes an impact on you. We also had a chance to sample some local honey. We visited some of the honey makers and we learned about the process, and this really connected back to our research because, like I said, we were trying to help find out what was happening to the flowering plants as well as the bees and butterflies in the area. And it was nice to see another side of why that's so important. It's very important to get fruits and vegetables, but something that many humans enjoy. We like to have honey. Wax is very useful, and so it was really great to add that into our itinerary and add that to something that we learned about. 2 times that we really got to interact with the local people, which was something that I thought was one of the most important parts of the trip. Was the first was we went up to a village that was high up in the mountains, and we just kind of walked around the village a little bit. We had taken a hike up there, as we did with the other places, and the people in the village, they were very welcoming. We walked around a little bit, and it was just a few houses. I'm saying a village, but it was quite tiny, but the people were very friendly, and lots of people wanted to have their picture taken, and so I have some nice photos of the people who allowed me to take their photo. There was a man and his wife and his mom, and they were particularly funny. They really wanted a lot of pictures of them taken, and I actually got the address from the man and sent him some copies of the photos that I had taken of him and his wife and his mom. He was really funny. He asked if I wanted to stay in the village and live there with all of the people in the village, so that made me feel really welcome. The man's wife, she was really sweet. She was showing me her cows and her flowers. He asked me to take a photo of his mom, and when I kind of motioned to her that I would be taking a picture, she just sat down and continued to smoke, and I got this really great picture of her. She was quite a character, and I really enjoyed meeting the people in that village. And the other time that we got to meet people was we met the people from the village around where we were doing our research, and we had a chance to hear why the research was so important, how the decrease in bees and butterflies had been impacting them, and their different ideas for what needed to be done, what could be done. So we had a really nice discussion with them. We made like a circle in the grass, and we just sat around in a circle and discussed, and they offered us some tea and some flowers. I think that time, that discussion with the local people was the most important and the most purposeful time of the whole expedition, especially as volunteers, because you can do a lot of different things. You can travel, you can do some volunteering, but connecting with the local people and hearing their thoughts about it helps you to understand the context of the whole thing and to really feel more passionate about it. So I think of all of the parts of the trip, that was something that really made me feel like we were making a difference, and also that the trip itself had a lot of good purpose. So that's where I'll leave you for the episode of Earthwatch in the Indian Himalayas. I hope that you enjoyed learning a little bit about Earthwatch, and also if Earthwatch is something that interests you, you'll check out their website so that you can get involved in any capacity, whether it be joining an expedition or donating or just raising awareness. You can even buy like great t-shirts from them. So, and like I said, they haven't sponsored this or anything. I just really had a good time and want to share that with others, because when my friend told me about it, I was really surprised that something like that existed. So I would like others just to know that that kind of thing exists. If you have any questions about Earthwatch, or if you have any questions about the trip to India or any topic that you would like to hear covered, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm really enjoying sharing these stories with you, and I hope that you are enjoying them as well. I will talk about my other Earthwatch expedition in Mongolia in a future episode, but for next week, we're going to be talking about Christmas markets in France, so stay tuned for that little bit of festive mood for the holiday season. Until then, thank you so much and see you soon.